idea. There's a whole bunch of ideas out there. But what the forward air controller did is he goes out and identifies the targets that were directed to him by upper authorities in Vietnam. We'll start off with the Vietnam, then we'll transition over to what happened over the other
I'm going to get on the other
classified
side
countries.
right in front of the speaker.
The National Command Authority would start the targeting list, and they did that based on reconnaissance and imagery and all this sort of stuff. So the targeting list started with the president because it was a very political war. And then he sent it down to his staff, and they identified targets based on these reconnaissance assets. And bear in mind, we're talking about a whole different international dateline. And by the time this dribbled through his staff and down to the Joint Chiefs of Staff to the Department of the Army, Navy, and Marines and Air Force, they added targets. And it went to Hickam, Hawaii, where our headquarters was, and they added targets. Now we're getting closer to the area, but it's taken about 30 hours to get to here at this point. And the president may have identified a truck that he wanted to have hit. You know that truck ain't going to be there after 36 hours. Well, anyway, it keeps on dribbling down, gets to MACV headquarters in Saigon, and they add targets. Then it goes out to the individual units, the 101st Airborne Division, the 82nd Airborne Division, and the 56th TAC Fighter Wing, and so forth, and they add targets based on closer intelligence information. And then they take these targets and they go ahead and split it up to the various fighter units to go ahead and say, you're to hit this target at this time. And oh, by the way, you at Udorn are going to hit that same target 2 hours later. And then you and Tak Lee are going to hit the same target 4 hours later. Now, there's a problem with this, just giving those targets just to the fighters. Here they are flying around at 28 to 32,000 feet. Now, I used to fly F-100s before I did this, so I understand what they're doing. And they're looking at these coordinates. And it's like a monkey looking at a clock. Where? And that looks about right there. And if he's within 10 miles, he's lucky. And so what they do is they take the specialization of the Air Force, the forward air controllers. We're taught to read maps, adjust artillery, and go ahead and coordinate the airstrikes. And we have a common method to go ahead and give a briefing to the fighters that minimizes their time because they're running out of gas. They're blowing around at 450 knots to 500 knots upstairs, and they want to get their bombs dropped and get home and get back and have a daiquiri. So we go out, we find the target. And once again, if it was a truck, there's a problem here. That truck ain't going to be there. So we go searching for the truck. Now, one of the other rules of engagements was if you found that target and it was not at the original coordinates, or maybe even a different target now, may have gotten into a convoy, or maybe a depot or something like this, you then have to send that information up to a command and control ship upstairs. These guys in the back, about 15 of them, have sharpened pencils and they're ready to take down all this information, and we have what we call a validation request. In a validation request, you go ahead and send up the coordinates, which are encrypted, and then you go ahead and say what the target is, and it's usually something, one word, code word like prime mover or truck or something like that. And then you go ahead and identify the weapon you want, because there may be some problems with just standard old bomb. You need something special. So you ask for a Mark 82, Mark 81s, 250 to 500 pound bombs. And then you say, I like to have instantaneous fusing or a nickel or dime delay fusing, a 0.05 second or tenth of a second delay. Depends on what you want to do with that target. And then you send it on up. And then they forward it to the next closest intelligence facility. They review the target, the coordinates, okay, that could possibly be that truck the president identified 36 hours before. And then he gives approval. The command and control ship then coordinates for a set of fighters that originally hit this target over there, but now it's over here. That's probably this set of high test flight out of Korat is now going to go ahead and drop the bombs on it. And they tell them where the rendezvous point is and the frequency of the forward air controller. Then he checks in at the rendezvous point. We give a little briefing, and then go ahead and go about their business and drop their bombs. And that's how it goes in Vietnam. In Laos, well, first off, you got to understand that in Laos, we had no chain of command. Now, for those of you in the military, you understand there's a chain of command. You have somebody who's responsible to you and someone you're responsible to. And it goes up and down this straight line, and you don't go out of there. Well, in the Ravens, we were spit out and sent over to the State Department, which is, for the military, abhorrent, because the Department of Defense and the Department of State are often in conflict with each other. So we're the little jelly beans in the middle. Go over there, and now I got nobody who has responsibility for me. I could do any damn thing I want. And in fact, the air attaché gave us a little. The rules in Southeast Asia, once again, goes to the same, the National Command Authority all the way down. And everybody has rules as it goes along, and the rule books are about that thick. And they change virtually on a daily basis, and they change on which military region we flew in South Vietnam. And it just became so complicated that it was virtually impossible to do your job. You had to go ahead and find these coordinates from 4,500 to 6,000 feet with a pair of binoculars, and that gets a little bit rough. You're trying to identify 10 to 12 foot high differential in elevations to go ahead and identify a point on the ground. It really gets complicated. In Laos, the air attaché gave us a half sheet of paper, double-spaced typewritten on only one half of one side only, how to get around the rules of engagements. So we didn't have to memorize anything. Also, the folks up in the upstairs understood we were our own approving authority. Now here you have a lieutenant, junior captain, making decisions that normally are reserved for generals and full colonels back on the ground in various headquarters facilities throughout Vietnam. And here's this little guy over there making his own decisions, making his own mind up, conducting the war the way he sees fit. And you can probably imagine there were a bunch of generals out there who had hissy fits about rogues out there, mavericks, doing their own thing. So when they found out who we were, our career was terminated. So a bunch of us kept our mouth shut when we finished our assignments and didn't say a damn word about what had happened. First off, for the reason because the program was classified. And why was it classified? It was classified because we were in a neutral country. And when we left Thailand, we left our uniforms and connects, never to be seen again. And we left our military identification card in a little small, like a time card punch-out stand in water pump operations, which is normally run by Air America. And we picked up our embassy card and our Laotian driver's license, and off we went. And we wore anything but a uniform. I mean, one guy, for instance, was a Hell's Angel before his prior career. And he had this metal helmet with a spike in the top, and he used to fly with that thing. And he'd poke holes in the top of the airplane whenever you got into turbulence or whatever. Little high-speed tape always solves all those problems, so you can get raindrops on you. Another guy kind of flew like Klinger in MASH. He had about 25, 30 different outfits he wore. One of them kind of tiger stripe. It looked like a female dress. And that was the way he flew. And then we had another guy shows up with California jammies. He's a surfer and flip-flops. And that's what he flew in. And, when he came in, he says, "Oh, Lord, what did they give us here?" But anyway, that was essentially what we did. Now, when was the time frame? It was mid-60s to about 1973 when Kissinger declared peace. And one day we're hot and heavy, and then the very next day the war's over, we won. And we were kicked out of the country. Now, so I covered the what, when, why. Well, everybody knew about the Vietnam War with all its trappings. It had 500,000 troops. It had news media embedded with them. It had nightly news with Walter Cronkite. They're reporting on deaths and bombs, tonnage drops. And there's a stiff competition between the Navy and the Air Force as who could drop more bombs and get better bomb damage assessments. And it just went on and on and on and on and on. And the guys conducting the war were being hampered with both of our hands tied behind our backs and expected to go ahead and shoot our guns from the behind. So we had to turn around and shoot. I mean, it was crazy. It was just ludicrous. Go over to Laos, no rules. How were we selected? Well, first off, you had to be a forward air controller. Now, a little background, once again, on forward air controllers and how this all came about. The Air Force, when it separated from the Army in 1946 or thereabouts, it was the Army Air Corps being run by a bunch of bomber pilot generals. And these guys went in a powwow with the Army generals up in Washington and said, okay, you can no longer, Army, you can't drop bombs from fixed-wing aircraft in support of yourself. You're going to have to rely on the Air Force to do this. And the Army looked at them like, are you kidding me? You're going to take all of our fighter outfits away from us? Oh yeah, we're taking them all away. Then we demand to have fighter pilot. You're going to support me in troops in contact, close air support with bombers? No, we'll support you with those fighters we just took away from you. Okay. Then what we demand then is you have 3 fighter pilot qualified pilots assigned to each brigade, and 1 or 2, depends on how hot and heavy it is, in combat division of it. And then in peacetime we can go with 1 and 1 as a stateside. So the Air Force general says, okay, you can have all the fighter pilots you want. We don't like them anyway. They're a bunch of arrogant assholes. So the problem was, this was all voluntary. Now, who in their right mind is going to go ahead and fighter pilot and give up his blowtorch to go down and slug around in the mud with a whole bunch of boonie rats and get shot at and have a backpack radio on his back and occasionally fly in an old relic of prior wars, propeller-driven airplanes, and no one would do that. So the Air Force had a problem getting volunteers. Well, there's a loophole in the way they do things, and a bachelor, when he's in a 3-year assignment stateside, as soon as he finishes his first year, can be reassigned involuntarily. So a couple of us were shunted over to the Army that way, but it wasn't nearly enough for the total requirements in Vietnam. In Vietnam, there were about 500 forward air controllers in Vietnam at any one day, of which only about 3 or 4 of us were actually full-blown background experienced fighter pilots, and that wasn't enough to go around for the 82nd Airborne, 101st Airborne, and a couple other units over there that required forward air controllers assigned to them. So the Air Force says, well, here's our solution. What we'll do is we'll go ahead and take guys straight out of pilot training. We'll send them over as forward air controllers. We'll select 10% of them over to Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis, America. Get them checked out in a T-33 in 1 week, how to drop little bombs, and then bless them as fighter pilots and send them on over. No one knows the difference. And sure enough, that's what happened. Now, in Vietnam, you had 3 different types of FACs. Actually, there were 2, but I called them 3. A FAC, B FAC, and C FAC. A FAC was the guy who's a fighter pilot qualified. He could go be assigned to the Army. B FACs were those who had no fighter background, and they would go ahead and support the Aussies, the South Vietnamese, the South Koreans, because we all know that U.S. Army grunts are more valuable than an Aussie grunt. Therefore, we don't need to send a fighter pilot qualified guy over there to go ahead and work troops in contact with the Aussies or the South Vietnamese. And no one ever told the Aussies, the South Vietnamese, or the South Koreans this, but once again, they just assumed. And war was conducted that way. Then there was the C-FACs, and I call them the chicken facts. And these are guys who did the night flying with the big speakers and the bullshit bombers, and threw out all the leaflets to go ahead and get the Viet Minh to go ahead and defect. And these were the guys, whenever they came down for the targeting list, they were high enough in rank that they could go and look at the targets and say, okay, this is not in the combat area, this is more neutral. Okay, I'll go take this target here. And they sort of meandered through their tour, just avoiding combat every chance they got. And there were a sufficient number of those to go ahead and really upset the rest of us who were carrying the workload. In Laos, it was like Shangri-La. You get the first impression, you get in these mountainous hills in the morning, and it's got this nice fog layer everywhere, nice cool temperature, and friendly people, and it's just wonderful. Until the Vietnamese came around, and they didn't get the memo from the agreements at Geneva Convention about how Laos was neutral, And they said, well, we got the certain groups in Laos who requested our presence, so they were running the trail. Now, Eisenhower, when he was part of the agreements for the neutrality of Laos, thought that he had bottlenecked up the North Vietnamese, because you have the Gulf Tonkin on the east, and you got China on the north, and you got Laos, which is neutral on the west, and you have a 17-mile border in the buffer zone, and that's the only legal place where the Viet Minh can traverse. So he turned it over to Kennedy, and guess what? The North Vietnamese just went and run around through Laos and built up the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And it came out of about 5 different valleys in North Vietnam and converged a beam in a little village called Savannakhet. And that part of the Laotian landscape is only about 40 miles wide between the Mekong Delta and the South Vietnamese border. That's the trail. And my first assignment was to Savannakhet, which was a beam